Imagine that you're inside a factory farm for the very first time in your life. Imagine that you're walking down a gangway made of concrete, and to your left and to your right are hundreds of trapped, pregnant pigs. Also imagine that you're just a teenager. You've never seen anything like this before. All you've done is read about it in a leaflet. And that here you are confronting the reality of how the vast majority of meat ends up on everybody's plate. So I was only a teenager, but I was a very bolshy teenager, and I was determined to find out how animals are really treated, because everybody I told, when I'd read certain leaflets from animal welfare organisations, that it was all an exaggeration. It just couldn't be that bad. And I managed to get inside one of the biggest factory farms back then in the UK, which was in the Midlands, with an agricultural student. And I walked into this place, which was a huge industrialised shed. And I couldn't quite take in what I was seeing, while a guy was excusing everything that we saw as being economically viable. So I left the student and this guy to talk, and I wandered up this gangway, and I looked at the mothers' faces, and all these mothers, remember, they were pregnant. You imagine keeping a dog inside a cage from the moment that she's pregnant till when she gives birth. You imagine doing that to a cat, keeping them in a tiny cage where that cat can never even turn round. What do you think your friends would say to you? What do you think society would think about you? And yet, here we are, doing this to animals that we eat for meat, day in, day out. So back then, what I'm talking about, they were called sow stalls. This is me, very few photos of me back then, around 15. And this is what it was like. And you can see some of those animals, it's actually impossible for them to turn around. It's impossible for some of them even to lie down. And so I was trying to justify this in my own mind, and walking down this long, gangway, which went on for a very long time. And at the end of it, there were just 4 boars, 4 male pigs. And I had no idea that these factory farm pigs were so large. The males were about the size of a Shetland pony. And they were each kept in a pen. And one of them was in a really bad way, and I'll never forget, he was salivating at the mouth, and he was lame. And he dragged himself towards me to the edge of the pen, and he looked me right in the eye. And we made a connection. Whatever you believe that connection is, a connection of the souls, but we connected. And that is why I've kind of avoided talking about this for very many years, because even now saying this, the emotions just flood back. Because I just said to him, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I think I meant I'm sorry from me, that you're kept like this, but also on behalf of the human race, that I belong to this species that is prepared to do this to you. And for what? Something we don't even need. So I walked out of that pig unit, and that was supposed to be the end of the tour. And I thought, what's in this next shed? It was very nearby. I went up to the door and tried the handle, and it was unlocked. And I walked in, and there was this cacophony of noise. And it was so loud, and it was hens, which were back then kept in what were called battery cages. So it's 5 hens to every cage. So you can see there from the pictures, you walk along again a gangway, and the cages are stacked in tiers 5 high. So the ones that were on the top tier I could barely see at all, and obviously the ones on the bottom tier pretty much in darkness actually. So they're in a dim lit shed, And I was walking along, and I can remember when I opened that door and stepped in, this cacophony of noise went completely silent. And I can remember thinking, oh my God, I've just given myself away because it's never silent in here. And I shut the door and started walking along, and I've never again seen anything like it. You're walking along the gangway and you look at these poor birds and the state that they're in, and some of them were bald, almost completely bald. Some of them were dead and being trampled by their cellmates. And they were stood on a sloping wire mesh floor, so they never had what was natural to them to feel the soil and the grass underneath their feet. Just on wire their entire lives, 18 months trapped inside there. You imagine how you would feel trapped in something. I'm in London today. Think of those red phone booths. Imagine being in there with 4 other people. How would you feel after one day with them? How would you feel after 1 week being trapped with people? They may be people you like, but they may not. But how would you feel? These animals become frustrated, they become bored, they start to become aggressive towards each other. Wouldn't we all? Some of them just, they basically degenerate into a kind of apathy. One of the most amazing things I've ever seen was when I lived in a place called Shire Newton, which is near Chepstow. We rescued hens. 5 hens from one cage, 5 hens from another, so 10 hens altogether. And the first time we let them out, to see their joy and how they knew things intuitively, putting the spade in the garden to dig, and they were there, right there. They knew there were going to be tidbits for them that they were really going to enjoy, and yet they'd never experienced that in their whole life. And the different personalities, how ignorant we are. We don't understand how their personalities are just as diverse as ours. One little hen called Lucy, she insisted on coming inside all the time. She laid eggs in my wardrobe. She became such a close little girl to me. She'd come in when we were having breakfast and wanted to be part of the action. And then others were much more, elitist and really didn't want to know you, darling. And so it went on, all these different personalities. And I tell you, we rescued a cockerel. Well, that was an experience. So we had 10 girls, and this one cockerel comes in, and he's all like a cockerel. Very handsome, showing off. And he goes in and immediately goes to dominate one of the female hens, and he gets on her back and starts to peck her and tries, like I say, to dominate completely. And from nowhere, all her other hen friends, 9 of them, just appeared running, some of them like 100 feet away. And they all ran to her rescue and ran on him and pecked him and got her. And he never tried that again. Just watching their different personalities and watching them grow and watching the feathers literally come back was such a joy, but also a very poignant reminder of what we're prepared to do to these animals for eggs. So today, yes, these battery cages have been banned. But this is a photograph that's taken much more recently. And you can see that I'm in there and the cages are bigger. And this is the cynicism of the industry. They're called enrichment cages, where you have up to 80 birds instead of 5 in one cage. And they're given a tiny bit more space, the size of a postcard. And that is it. And that's supposed to be so-called enrichment. Those animals are still on metal floors and they're still an absolute mess. And when I was in there, I can remember thinking, no vet will ever come and see you and treat you and make you well again. And I saw so many dying birds and so many dead birds, and again, some are completely bald. Just disgusting. What kind of species is prepared to do that to another animal? What kind of species is prepared to do that when they thrive on a vegan diet and yet choose cruelty? So, as a teenager, as I mentioned before, I was a very determined young person and very passionate. And I think that's the thing about teenagers. It's quite hard to control your passion in the way that you learn as an adult. So when you start to learn about that level of cruelty, it's quite hard to handle. And I can remember talking to my mum and trying to persuade my family to back then go vegetarian, and came back with the reality of what animals go through. And in fact, my mum did go vegetarian pretty much straight away, bless her. My dad was the one who took the mickey for about the following 20 years. But eventually he changed too. Changed to the degree where I was in a pub with him, I would never forget this, and he'd just gone vegetarian himself, and somebody ordered a ham sandwich and he went, "You don't want to do that," to a complete stranger. And and I sort of looked at my dad and I was like, "This is going to be interesting." And he goes, "Poison, that is, poison. You don't want to be eating that. Filled with cruelty, filled with poison." And I was like, my goodness, if my dad can switch round to that position from being so defensive of meat, literally anybody in this planet can. And I always remember that when I'm campaigning for Viva, because there was no harder convert, if you like, than my own dad. My brother, my sister, they both went vegetarian as well. So there was that sort of feeling of understanding around, but lack of knowledge about nutrition and health. And of course we didn't have access to Google because it did not exist back then. We didn't have smartphones, nobody had computers, or hardly anybody. So you were getting information, really written information, through the post. It was very different times. Nobody at school was vegetarian, but I had decided that the most cruelty that was happening on the planet, if you want to sort of give it in quantitative values, is happening to farmed animals. But what on earth can you do about it? So I went to university and I did a degree in zoology, and I switched to zoology and psychology so I could avoid all the vivisection, and decided that I had to campaign. Even though I didn't really know what campaigning was, I still had the rose-tinted spectacles that if you just tell people what's happening, they'll change, won't they? Because it's right to change, isn't it? Isn't it right to be compassionate? Isn't it right to be more healthy? Isn't it right not to treat these other beings as if they're, mere worthless commodities? We don't want to treat them that way, do we? Surely we just have to open people's eyes. And of course, to some degree, that is absolutely true. And it's what Viva has been doing for the last 30 years. So I worked at the Vegetarian Society through much of my 20s, actually. And I suppose you could say built my trade in many ways. I launched a campaign that still exists today called National Vegetarian Week. I launched the first campaign ever in schools in the UK, which was called Scream. I still remember it to this day. You might think, why? Scream stood for School Campaign for Reaction Against Meat. And the reason I remember it, because the response to it was phenomenal. You have to remember it was very novel back then. Nobody had campaigned. I was working for a body that had been set up in the mid-1800s, but had never campaigned. And so this was all new territory for the Vegetarian Society. And so, doing these talks to school kids and launching that campaign created such a stir. It's kind of hard to imagine now. And we were getting 500 to 900 letters every day from kids, written letters, wanting to help us stop cruelty to animals. And that was going on for like a year after the campaign had launched. I decided, though, to set up Viva because the Vegetarian Society was not comfortable with campaigning, and it certainly didn't want to do investigations. And I thought somebody has got to stand up for these animals and be proud of that and say that the answer is to go vegan. And I had a difficult decision to make, but did obviously make it, which was to launch a new organisation, but with almost no money. So it was extremely tough times. And I did it from my home, which was then in a place, tiny hamlet actually, called Church Minshall in Cheshire, which is in between Nantwich and Crewe. Right in the middle of farming land, surrounded by dairy farmers. And they knew what I was doing as well. And so we were attracting volunteers, but all the volunteers who came in to help Viva had to sleep in my house. So it was interesting times, as you could imagine. And we got a donation. I did a 5-year strategy and presented it to a lady called Audrey Eighton, and she was the one that gave the first sizable donation. And so I'll always thank her, from the bottom of my heart. She's passed now, but what a difference she made. And I knew that if the first campaign didn't do well, then that was probably it. But it did do well, and I launched on a campaign called Convert a Parent. So through the Vegetarian Society years, I built up a lot of contacts and a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience in working especially with teenagers. And then had gone on to campaign to adults for them. But I'd always loved campaigning to teenagers because teenagers are so prepared to change overnight. They get it. They don't give all the excuses in the way that adults do. And so we did a campaign that was deliberately sort of controversial. We were saying teenagers know better than you, the parents. And for once, let them educate you. Let them be the ones that you listen to. And so we launched Viva in London to an absolutely packed house with everybody from Paul McCartney's agent to the most precious person, my mum. No, but through to national papers, teenage magazines. We had television there, Radio 1 Newsbeat. It was just absolutely packed, and it was very exciting, very buzzy. And one of the national papers took a picture of me doing a school talk and did this big headline, "She's creating a Hitler's youth." And it's hard to remember, but back then, vegetarianism was seen as being extreme. And it's good to remind yourself of that because you can think about how far we've come in terms of veganism being generally accepted as normal, in inverted commas. Vegetarianism back then was not accepted as being the mainstream or as being normal. And so we had a lot of work to do through those years when we first set up Viva 30 years ago. And we did. We launched campaign after campaign after campaign. And one of the first early campaigns, in fact, was on kangaroos. So I always remember my mum calling me in the Viva offices. By then, we'd moved to Brighton. And she was, "Juliet, they're selling kangaroo meat in Tesco. Oh my God, stop them." And I thought, really? Is she seeing things? And in fact, what had happened is we'd had a major disease that had run through cattle called BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. And that disease had killed these. It literally turned their brains to sponges. Horrible death. And the worry, of course, was that that would pass to human beings. So it was getting media coverage constantly. And we set up a BSE helpline as a very young organisation. We're only about 2 years old because nobody else was doing it. So we were taking hundreds and hundreds of calls from the public about BSE and, of course, urging people, of course, to go vegan. And so the kangaroo industry took advantage of BSE, thinking that they could market it as a free-range meat product because the kangaroos hadn't eaten the brains of other animals. You know, they were wild shot, so that's okay. So I was thrown into the midst of a campaign, which I had no knowledge of, thinking, I've never actually met a kangaroo. Am I the right person to be doing this? But having had a degree in zoology, I think that helped because I just threw myself very seriously into finding out everything about kangaroos. And in fact, we did a campaign where we got hold of footage where how those animals are killed and the boy stamping on the Joey's head. And it went huge. So again, this is before everybody had computers and Google and all the rest of it. So it went huge through the national press. And we built up support from the public very quickly indeed. And we did our very first day of action. So it was Viva that invented these days of action where you get supporters to go outside wherever your target is, in this case Tesco, on the same day. And they didn't like it. And I remember the journalist, when she published the piece saying something like, horror roost steaks at Tesco, she said, oh, they'll have pulled the whole thing by next week. And indeed, 4 days later, they pulled all kangaroo meat. And suddenly things go wild in Australia, and I'm invited over. And I go over and I'm treated like a sort of rock star that people have got very mixed feelings about. And, did something like 50 radios in 1 week, followed by every major television show in Australia. And so the campaign continued. We targeted each supermarket one by one. And one experience I will always remember is I was flown back to do an ABC, which was, many millions of people, huge audience. And I'd said to them, why don't you just interview somebody from Australia rather than bringing someone from the other side of the planet? And they said, if you don't come, we're dropping it. So I kind of felt like I had to go. So I did. And I flew into Sydney and then flew from Sydney on a small plane to this godforsaken place in South Australia. And we're driving down, there's nothing, no shops, no sign of life at all. It's just like desert with these sort of grey-green plants every now and then, very dry, very dead looking. And we got to this little community, and when I say little, I mean it, literally about 12 houses in the middle of nowhere, in the way that you just don't get in Britain. And there he was, this kangaroo shooter, and I met him, and he's like boasting that he'd killed 100,000 kangaroos, and he thought that was great. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to have to do television. So they're putting me in a situation where I'm debating with this guy the next day. It's very hot. So in Fahrenheit, it's like 110 degrees, really, really hot. And that night I was worried that this guy was going to kill me. I literally thought he will. And I'd been warned about it from another kangaroo shooter who had stopped killing the roos. And he had said, he will kill you. Be careful. Be really careful. They'll just say it's an accident. And so I'm in his house, a guest of his. And I can remember that night pushing, the furniture against the door, literally, so he couldn't get in. But before we did that, we had dinner with the TV crew, and he started to drink. And when he was drinking, he started to boast about how he liked to kill pets as well, especially cats. He hated cats. And I thought, good, keep talking. I want this camera crew to see who you really are. What kind of person enjoys shooting animals for a living? Really enjoys it. And he had this very modern vehicle, very expensive, with the great big lights. So what he would do is go out at night and shine these spotlights out in the middle of the wilderness. And if there was a kangaroo there, the idea is that with these very high-powered rifles, you shoot them in the head. And of course, they don't always shoot them in the head. They shoot them in the neck, they shoot them in the body, and these animals are left to suffer. If it's a female kangaroo, then there's always the joey, and they pull the joey out and often swing them over and kill them or stamp on their heads. And the joeys at foot are left to starve to death or die of cold. I mean, it's just appalling. The whole industry is appalling. And those animals, who they blame for the denigration of Australia's environment, are soft-footed animals who are meant to be there. The poor animals that are destroying the environment, of course, are the hard-hoofed sheep and cows, which, of course, were never natural to Australia and shouldn't be there at all. So these industries lie, and I did the ABC documentary, and it was a good documentary. It put our viewpoint forward, and we've targeted the supermarkets one by one, and all of them dropped kangaroo meat. And then there was ostrich meat at the same time, again coming out of the BSE crisis. And Viva was credited, I put in inverted commas, by vets in the ostrich magazine of being the organisation that closed the whole ostrich industry in the UK, because we just took on exotic meats and decided we were going to stop the whole damn lot before wild meat became normalised in the UK. One of the first factory farms that I ever went to film in was a duck factory farm. And so we'd moved on as Viva to wanting to expose what actually happens inside these places. And back then, nobody was doing it. So you have to remember, it's all new. I didn't have anybody to mentor me or tutor me or take me out on an investigation. So I went out on an investigation of duck farming, because nobody had ever exposed how ducks are kept in the UK. So all that ducks in those Chinese restaurants all over the place, and duck meat being sold in our supermarkets, where does it come from? And in fact, Radio 4 went round asking people, and everybody was saying, well, they're shot on ponds? Are they shot on the lakes? Nobody had a clue that they were factory farmed. And so I went with a female colleague and went in broad daylight. We decided we would try the whole ruse of being just walkers, country walkers, dressed up as country walkers with our country sticks, and that would be fine. So I had the film, the movie the camera, and she had the stills camera. And we walked into this huge place, actually. It was a huge factory farm with many industrialised sheds. And I saw this worker and I thought either we run and hide or I front this out. And I decided to do the latter and walked up to this guy and said, "Hey, just walking in the countryside, love animals, can see you've got animals in there." Oh yeah, I've got pigs in here. And I went, "Oh really, pigs?" But, you know, we could hear the ducks over there, so they had both on site. So he said, "Oh, come and see the pigs. Oh, these are RSPCA approved." I went, "Really? Why is that?" He said, "Oh, because they've got 2 nipple drinkers instead of 1. And I said, "But what about everything else? The concrete, they've not got straw." He said, "No, doesn't make any difference. That's all they've got, but now we've got their accreditation." So that was the first sort of eye-opener to what the sort of was called freedom food back then, what the RSPCA scheme meant, and what, more importantly, what it didn't mean. Certainly didn't mean freedom for those animals. And so we were talking to this guy, and he was just completely oblivious to who we were. But then a car, great big sort of 4x4, it drives up, and this man looks at us and he's immediately suspicious. I could see it in his face, and this is the manager. And so he's like, "Who are they?" And I was just going for a walk, just talking about the animals. And he gets on his phone, and I thought, shit, we've got to get the duck footage now. And so I left my colleague talking to this guy, and I said, "I'm just going to look over there," and obviously had to get inside the duck shed, which is again a huge industrialised shed. I managed to get in. One of the doors was unlocked again, went in and had a look around. And this is what I found. So all these white feathered ducks in their thousands on the floor. My heart was racing because of the situation that I was in. It was the first time I'd done this properly. And I walked down the side of the shed, and I could see and hear actually that the men were walking around, because there was one like half door and I could see them walking past. So clearly colleagues of this farm manager had been called by this point. So I threw myself down on the floor behind this big tank and just got down at their level and started to film them. And that's when I could see, in fact, that some of them were blind, some of them had flipped over and couldn't right themselves, and they were just in a dreadful state. And these are the ducks, you know, related to the mallards, you know, that people feed, you know, and they take their kids out and that they love. And yet again, this discrepancy between how we treat animals that we label as either wild or as pets, and those that we label as farmed animals. It is quite incredible that we allow ourselves to be hoodwinked in this way. So I came out of the shed. I thought at some point, I've got to come out. I can't stay in here. I remember the floor was absolutely soaking wet in their excreta, so they were standing on it, these poor birds, with no access to water other than to drink, but they could never swim, never do everything that they're being, you know, geared up to be able to do. I thought, I've got to get out. I had got the footage, and it was good footage, and I thought, okay, so I walked around the side of this big shed, and there's about 6 blokes surrounding my colleague by this point. Again, as I said, she had the stills camera. And I just shouted to her, "Run!" And as I went by them, they lunged for my camera. And I stupidly hadn't taken the film out. I learnt a lot through this experience. And I ran through them, and they started to chase me. And then I thought that they're bound to catch up with me. And the car started going down the road by my side as I'm running. And I managed to get the camera and get the film out and literally shoved it down my knickers. And I thought, you know, hopefully that's going to keep it safe. I'm going to be okay. And got back to the car, and they'd actually jammed it in with 3 tractors. So this is my little illustration of that. Just imagine my car there in the middle of all that. There's no way my car was getting out. And so the whole argument began with them, where the guy's saying, you know, "Who are you really? What do you want here?" And my friend very dramatically opens the film camera and takes out the film, because back then you had an actual film, and she pulls it out like that to ruin it and says, "There you are, there's your bloody pictures. We're only out for a walk." And of course the film was empty. She hadn't really done that, and sort of dramatically throws it down to one side. And then she says something like, they said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Look, I'm going to call the police." I thought actually it's safer to do that. And I did. I called the police and they said, "Well, we're going to call the police as well then." And I said, "Fine." So both sides called the police. And the police turned up and they're like, "What's your name?" And my friend goes, "Under Act 3 of Section 1, page 1002, you don't actually have to answer those questions." And I was like, okay, they're really going to believe that we're from the countryside going for just a walk now. And it was really quite a funny experience from that perspective. Anyway, the police made them move their tractors and we got in the car and I've never put my foot down on a pedal so much as I did. I just had to get away from that place. But that was my first experience. But finishing the story, we got then somebody who was very, very well known at the time. She was Twiggy. And she was presenting national television. She was the in vogue person at the time, and she agreed to go on GMTV for us and actually agreed only if they'd showed the footage that I got that day. So millions of the British public saw that footage and she spoke about how it made her feel. And it went on every national newspaper back then. So the campaign was well covered. And that was the start of Viva's investigations for the next 30 years. Of which I had many talented and wonderful staff be involved with. And so we moved on to many different types of farms. This one is a terrible place called Hogwood, of which we made a documentary about, which is on Netflix and Amazon and YouTube. And because of seeing all these this cruelty, we rescued some pigs and their piglets. And one of those pigs was called Hope Apple Blossom. We named her in a competition, and there's her beautiful 3 piglets. So I had the glory of getting to know pigs much more intimately and how clever they are. We read that they're clever, and boy, oh boy, they are so intelligent. Hope had the ability to call just the girls to her or just the boys, things that blew me away, which shouldn't have done. But again, I was ignorant too. I didn't know how incredibly intelligent and beautiful these animals are and how playful and mischievous. And that was a real privilege. That's one of my happier moments. And Flat House, I hardly even have words for places like this. So these are so-called mega pig farms which exist in increasing amounts in the UK. So you have this strange, it sounds contradictory, position where there are more and more vegans than there've ever been in the UK. But factory farming, what do? They make it more intensive. That's what they want to do. So I'm just going to talk a little bit for a minute about Flat House Farm, bringing you to the present day. So I was with my colleagues, Laura Hellwig, and I was with our patron, Wendy Turner-Webster. And we went inside this terrible place with our head of investigations then, who's Lex. This is the farm owner. So I'm just going to show you a little film of what happened.
We're just drawing up to the farm now. I'm starting to feel that sort of pit of the stomach feeling. You know, you feel slightly sick. Because I know that we're going to be confronting a lot of cruelty.
Well, the first thing that we're confronted with seeing is this poor, desperately ill animal who's just been left to die. Just these places, they just don't care. These animals are just commodities. Please look at the expression on this pig's face and remember that.
When you say investigated,
Yes.
What do you mean?
We went into the sheds and
You
filmed.
illegally came onto a property?
That's right, we trespassed and came onto the property in the public interest because the state of the animals is absolutely appalling and your sheds are absolutely filthy and there's feral cats eating dead piglets. Can I I just ask, do you think you should be more concerned about the state of these pigs? You don't
yes,
seem
no,
concerned at
I know
all.
I don't work for them, but what I'm wondering is what you're doing on the property.
It's so appalling.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Tell you what, should we call the police?
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
the animals are in so much distress. You
Yeah,
work for the
yeah,
farm.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
said
no,
you
the
work
wind
for the
turbine company. Right. So what
Okay.
I'm going to do?
So we'll stand on the farm's property, so it's got nothing to do with you.
Right, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to
Excuse
prevent
me,
you
why?
from doing
What have you got to do with the farm?
because I don't want you here.
I mean, how can the people that actually work here come in here and just leave this animal to slowly suffer?
So you work on this farm, obviously.
No comment, not
No, you said you did before.
No
No
comment,
comment.
not
I was just
talking to you.
wondering,
You've been asked.
can I just ask
Are
why?
you the driver?
You've been asked to
Are
leave
you?
politely.
Are you?
Good.
If you
We're
won't
not
leave, we're going to have to
communicating
ask you
with
to leave.
Despite the abject misery at Flat House and the involvement of the police, RSPCA and trading standards, no charges have been brought against the farm. However, millions of people have seen the suffering for themselves, and Viva will just keep on exposing cruelty until scenes like those at Flat House Farm no longer exist.
Starving pigs and animals left for dead at Flat House Farm.
Animal rights group Viva placed secret cameras at Flat House Farm.
Animal cruelty at a Leicestershire pig farm.
The directors of a Leicestershire pig farm have been hit with a £4,500 fine after pleading guilty to breaching animal welfare regulations.
Richard Elvidge and his sister Rachel attended court today after pleading guilty to just one out of an original list of 66 charges.
The horrors at that pig farm stayed with me for a long time.
What do you make of today's proceedings?
It's the perfect example that the law just doesn't exist to protect farm animals.
Although trading standards dropped most of the charges, we still won. Flat House Pig Farm was found guilty of cruelty, and we had the ultimate victory. It has closed down thanks to our investigation.
I'm sure anybody watching that who's basically normal and adjusted will be appalled at the levels of cruelty that those people left those animals in utter neglect and utter pain. But this is factory farming. This is the reality. And if you don't like it, and you don't like what you see, then the answer is, of course, to reject it. Because the government aren't going to do that for you. You have to take responsibility. We all have to take responsibilities for our own actions. And being vegan is such a positive way to actually make your protest and make a real difference to the world. Coming to the end of my talk, I just want to very quickly mention the achievements of Viva Poland. There are so many, just mentioning a couple. 12 years ago, we took over 20 hectares of a shelter from an animal hoarder where hundreds of animals had died every year, and turned it into an educational sanctuary where there are now about 400 pigs, cows, cats, dogs, horses and foxes rescued from fur farms. We've conducted investigations in slaughterhouses which have resulted in about 60 slaughterhouse employees being charged, including a record of 35 people from the McKean slaughterhouse. And after 10 years of campaigning and court cases, the use of animals in circuses has almost completely gone from Poland. And that's just a little hint of what we've been doing over there in the last 20 years. We've just launched Viva in Uganda just this year. So in mountain gorillas, there's just over 1,000 left on the entire planet, and about half of those are in Uganda. You think about these noble species that are so closely related to us, such incredibly complex, beautiful, intelligent animals, and yet critically endangered. And so Viva Uganda has raised funds from people in the UK, actually, to protect the people who protect the gorillas. And we've provided them with the equipment for them to be able to do their job. That's just one example of what Viva Uganda is doing. We're also giving vegan food to an orphanage so that children are fed well, and they are taught to be kind to all kind, respect for wildlife, respect for farmed animals, respect for cats and dogs. they're just 2 of the projects that have already launched. There's about 5 running at the moment. And back to the UK, from starting in my garage in Cheshire to the innumerable campaigns and investigations to saving farm animals and to promoting veganism. Last year, the Muller Killer campaign reached 1.2 billion people alone. Our television ad has reached 46 million. We're making the first vegan cinema ad, which is launching in 2025, so watch out for that, because that is very dramatic and powerful. Finally, there are 30 billion land animals farmed on our planet. Try and imagine 30 billion. It's a number which you can't even conceive of. It's over 3 times the amount of every single human on Earth. This gargantuan number is hidden behind the curtains of modern progress. Modern progress is pushing animals beyond their limits in an insane system of intensive farming that is crushing their souls and crashing the planet. It simply is not sustainable. Meanwhile, Europe could be fully sustainable on a vegan diet without any of this horrific suffering that billions of animals are put through, torn from their families, born into a cycle of constant pain and wretchedness on an industrial scale that is beyond dystopian. But the choice is ours, to support this or to go vegan. Choose suffering or choose compassion, violence or peace. We don't have to destroy our world and its precious life. It's a choice for all of us. And thank you to those who have already chosen to be vegan.